Welcome to the Over the Hump podcast. Your gateway to the world of the iconic Brahman breed of cattle. At BRC Ranch, our passion for Brahman cattle runs deep. Join us as we delve into the heart of this extraordinary breed, unveiling its rich history, exploring industry trends, and sharing captivating stories that define the American Brahman. BRC Ranch stands as the pinnacle of Brahman excellence in America, boasting a decade-long legacy of champions and housing the finest Brahman bulls worldwide. It's not just about cattle, it's about a legacy that reverberates across ranches and hearts. Brought to you by BRC Ranch, where the Brahman legacy thrives and stories are woven into the very fabric of ranching. This is Over the Hump. And now your hosts, Brendan Cottrell, Rachel Cottrell, and Keaton Dodd.
Thank you to everybody for tuning back into another episode of the Over the Hump podcast. And boy, do we have an exciting pair of guests for y'all today when we talk about polled cattle, maternal merit, focusing on function. I think these two people are not only extremely positive in terms of their mentality and fair in the way they treat people, but I really think progressive pair of polled Brahman breeders. And so without further ado, here's Ray and Ryan Salinas. I'd like to welcome everybody back to another episode of the Over the Hump podcast. I'm your host, Keaton Dodd, and to me, we've got a pair of really, really special guests that I've been looking forward to interviewing. And if you're no stranger to Brahman cattle, I think these are people that you've probably met down the road, whether it was at a production sale or a live event. Good friends of the BRC brand. We've got Ray and Ryan Salinas with us with Salinas Ranch. And so, guys, if y'all could just get us started with maybe a little bit of the history of Salinas Ranch, introduce your family, things of that nature, that'd be wonderful.
Sure, Keaton. How you doing? This is Ray. Ryan sitting here next to me. Keaton, first I want to say, this is a great format for learning about different topics and different ranches. I ran into Hatch Cummings at the World Brahman Congress. Walked up to him, we'd met before, and I said, Hatch, I really enjoyed your podcast. And he said, well, thank you. And I said, well, it's kind of neat because you're actually learning about people's operations. You don't go to a show and walk up to John Doe and go, hey, John Doe, tell me about yourself. And, what's your background and what's your program? So it's a great format. I think I mentioned that to John Locke also. I think I ran into him also and said, it's just kind of interesting hearing about their programs. So really, really like what you guys are doing with these podcasts. I think they're fascinating. Yeah. Salinas Ranch, it was literally started from scratch. We're a family-owned operation. It's my wife, Cindy, and we have three sons, Luke, Ryan, and Brandon. Ryan is heavily involved in the day-to-day activities of the ranch. My other two sons, Luke and Brandon, they help out, when there's heavy workloads such as, calving season or working cattle and such. We're kind of workaholics. We actually don't really use any outside help. We probably put in, weekly 75, 80 hours between our feed mill and the ranch. The Brahman bug, like I say, I think people on the breed, you always kind of have it or you don't. My grandfather raised Brahman this is back in the 70s. I still remember them, skinny Brahman cows with brown Swiss bulls on them. They had about 140 cows. That was my favorite summer trips, was visiting his ranch and just lasting memories. Unfortunately, that ranch was sold back in the 80s. As everybody got older, the uncles started dying off and the aunt sold it, and that's the way it goes. Growing up, I had a mixed bag of cattle. I liked Santa Gertrudis. This is back in the 80s. They were kind of up and coming. But I also had some Brahman females, and the Brahman females were just always my favorites. Unfortunately, as I paid my way through college, I had to sell what cows I had left and, sell them and, make tuition and books and such. So it was a passion I had early on.
Well, I'll tell you, back in the day, Dad had a vision and a drawing, and I'll let him tell you about that drawing because it's kind of funny how it all played out and kind of came to fruition.
Oh, so back this is like the mid 80s. I guess I was probably a junior, senior in high school or in college. I'm sorry. I wrote on a piece of paper a drawing and had a house. Had the gate entrance, a pretty good sized pond in front of this house. Had German shepherds in the yard, and had pastures, kind of square boxes, with dots of Brahman cattle in it. It was just kind of a visionary thing. Back then, when I didn't have two nickels to rub together, I said, I'll have this someday. And again, back then, was the days where, you'd eat once a day because you didn't have enough money for 3 times a day. Fast forward to today, coincidentally or by, whatever luck, and I always say it's a lot of luck and some hard work in there, our ranch pretty much looks exactly what that drawing looked like, back in 1986 or 7.
Spoke it into existence, I guess, or drew it into existence. So that's
Yeah. And it's even down to what the house looked like. And I've always loved German Shepherds and people that come to our place. We have some very large German Shepherds. They probably weigh 115 pounds apiece. And, it's just one of those things of making the dream come true. And I'm a big believer in that, hard work, a little luck, and do what you want to do.
So you said that you initially had Brahmins, but then you sold off those cattle. And so how did you get back into Brahman, I guess, or the second kind of time in being a Brahman breeder?
Sure. Like everybody else, graduated college, and I guess it was in 88. I went to Southwest Texas State, which is Texas State now. My first job out of college was working for a kind of hot topic nowadays for the government. I worked for the Department of Defense in the civil service thing. I was in a management program. So I have a degree in accounting, and I didn't last very long working for the government. I was a young kid, with a lot of ideas, and and not to get political here, I just saw tremendous government waste. And I was always told by people that I worked with, you just keep your mouth shut, college kid, and don't worry about how we do things here. So needless to say, I didn't last too long in the government, and started my first business when I was 24, 25 years old. Found myself living in Northwest Austin, up in a nice subdivision up in the hills over there, in a 80 by 120 square foot lot with a 2-story house on it. Just said, I just can't do this. My wife's a very patient lady. I said, after 1 year, I said, I can't do this. I can't live in the city. So we bought our first ranch in Liberty Hill, Texas, which is about 30 miles northwest of Austin. Started from scratch there once again. So it seems like that's kind of my history there. Bought some land on the South San Gabriel River, built a house, built fences, built a barn, built some pens, started buying, some F1 cows, just doing basically F1 production. Well, once again, the bug kicked in again, and I need more rain and I need more grass. So started looking for a ranch, east of I-35, and came across our ranch that actually found it. This is before internet was really hot and heavy. Found it in a classified ad, a little ad about the size of my thumb that said, ranch for sale in Washington County. It had a bunch of, said it had pastures in coastal Bermuda and yada, yada. And I said, well, I think I need to go look at this. Long story short, we bought the ranch and had both of them there for a while. As luck would have it, it took almost 2 years to sell our Liberty Hill ranch. And kind of a funny story, wasn't too popular with the family, but we were waiting for offers, and we'd get some here and there. But then one weekend, 2 years later, we get 3 offers, all full price in one weekend. And took one of the offers. It was a cash deal. And this is where it got a little sticky. The guy says, here's the deal. I'm visiting Europe for the next 3 or 4 months. We need to close this ranch in 17 days or I'll be back in 3 or 4 months. And he was legitimate. I mean, it was all cash offer. And I said, well, I guess we're moving in 17 days. So we packed up the cows, the dogs, the kids, moved to near our ranch. The ranch didn't have a house. We lived in Round Top, Texas, little town.
Mm-hmm.
And then started fixing that ranch up. Our current ranch, it was owned by an absentee owners. We ended up, by the time we cleared all the old fences, because the fences were so brittle, it was like 100-year-old wire, we had to basically start from scratch there too. We ended up with a barn and a water well. And kind of like BRC did with your land there, it's like, all right, we got to start building pens, fences, and such.
Yeah, it seems like an unconquerable task when you first get started, but if you kind of just chip away at it, eventually you have the place the way you want it.
Yeah, we're still chipping away as we speak. I mean, we're working on pens now and improving fences, and it never ends. There's always a project, always something to work on, and kind of progress the ranch forward. So always something to kind of dip into.
So, once we had the ranch and we started, again, the Brahman thing never left me. They always say it's in you or it's not. It was time to start, stocking with Brahman cattle. I didn't want to get one or two here or there. I just wanted to buy a group, and was fortunate to have met a gentleman named Gerald Dennis. His nickname was Tiger. He was kind of from the Sam Duplantis, Johnny Jeffcoat era. He was selling out in his mid upper 60s, and he just said it's time to slow down. And we ended up buying that herd. And Tiger became kind of a mentor of mine. The herd had really good cattle, really fertile cattle. They were a very solid group. Tiger had been breeding Brahman for about, I think he told me, around 40 years. Kind of was out of Benton, Louisiana, and he had moved to Winnie, Texas. And in that group, there was Sugarland Genetics. And I'll be honest with you, back in the day, I didn't know much about Sugarland Genetics. I was still in college when they dispersed. Tiger had a fascination with them. He told me many, many stories about Sugarland and about their cattle. And I was fascinated by the pedigrees. And the more I learned about it and did as much research on it, I really kind of liked that ranch's philosophy. They were a production-oriented ranch. Tiger used to tell me, when you pull up to Sugarland, their headquarters, there's a big old billboard that says, we are for-profit ranch. And that kind of always stuck with me. I'm a big numbers guy, and I want to have cattle not for a hobby, not for lifestyle. I want to make money at this. It was kind of a fun way of getting going, because we took over a herd and say, okay, what can we do with this herd? Tiger used to always tell me this. He knew all the folks in Wharton really well. And we met many, many a times, just in the evenings. He'd come out to the ranch and help out. And he always told me this. He goes, you better figure out to do something with this herd that's unique, he said, because you're never going to out Hudgens the Hudgens. No, and he said, they got way too long of a head start, and they got a lot bigger herd than you'll ever have. He goes, so you better do something unique. Going forward, we started working with those cows. They had great, pedigrees and such. We had a Hereford bull on them for a little while and said, no, we're going all registered. We had a Jeffcoat bull on them. And, with that Sugarland thing in my head, I had the opportunity to started talking to Mr. Edwards, Morris Edwards from Stark, Florida, Edwards Brahman. Ended up buying a 100% pedigreed Sugarland bull from him. He was a moderate bull, probably weighed 1,900 pounds. Neat thing about that bull, he had perfect feet, made easy fleshing females for us. But the neat thing about him was at the age of 14 or 15, I semen tested him for the last time, and he still passed with flying colors. I mean, he was a hot bull.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. And speaking of Edwards, a few years later, the Edwards herd became available. Once again, raised chasing Sugarland stuff. I flew out to Stark, Florida, and bought the herd the same day when I saw him, and started moving cattle from Florida, back to Texas. In that group, there was some really unique polled cattle. And of course, one of them was Lexor. Lexor was a bull that we co-owned with the Edwards family. And, he really gave us a boost in our polled genetics.
Yeah, definitely. That bull is still, world famous amongst polled breeders. But I guess that leads me into a question that I've been kind of waiting on the transition for. Why polled? Why did raising polled cattle jump out to you guys?
Back then, this is before the days of Facebook and all that. Nowadays, you get bombarded on social media with different genetics, different looks for cattle and such. But there was kind of four things. It was kind of like not a perfect storm, but it was four circumstances that kind of happened at the same time. In the back of my mind, Tiger always said, you better do something different. And that was always in the back of my mind because I just didn't want to be your average breeder. And I tell the story of walking to Houston Livestock Show one evening, went to every stall. This is 17, 18, 19 years ago. And I remember walking through every stall, looking at pretty much every animal. And I came across one Brahman polled heifer. And I'll be honest with you, Keaton, I can't tell you who she was out of, even what the ranch was. And I thought, that's interesting. There's one polled animal in this whole barn. Kind of threw that in my back pocket. And I told the story about getting chewed out at 65 miles an hour. I had taken a group of Brahman heifers to Brenham to get dehorned by our local vet. And I'm going down Highway 290. For those that don't know, Highway 290 is a divided highway. I'm minding my own business, just driving along. And I have 20 dehorned heifers in the trailer. Well, I'm driving along, and this lady in a Mini Cooper pulls up next to me, asks me to roll, puts up, right next to me, says, roll down your window. I rolled down my window, and I proceeded to get chewed on. And she's pointing to the back of the trailer. Initially, I thought, I have a tail light, I have a flat, I have something's going on with the trailer. And she had some very choice words for me. You could read her lips, and I don't think I can repeat it on this podcast, but I got my butt chewed out. Waved her on, and she wasn't done. I mean, she chewed me out for a good mile. Waved her on, rolled up my window, and I said, well, thanks a bunch, lady. So that happened, and around that time, I guess it was the next calf. This is kind of the one that set me over the edge, but I got to do something here. We dehorned probably another set of heifers or bull cows, whatever they were at the time, and we ended up just with a bad horning job, kind of from an infection point of view. Had to bring a pretty good sized group back in, recauterize, weight loss, just had to basically rework everybody again. And I remember telling my sons, I said, this is BS. We're going to get to the point one day we're not doing this anymore. So it was kind of the culmination of different things that happened all at the same time. And at that point, we just said, you know what? And we had not much to start with. From the Edwards group, we had 2 polled bulls, some polled genetics, and we said, you know what? We're going to start making polled cattle, and it's going to take us a while, but we're going to get going.
I'll tell you, Keaton, going back, just bring that Lexor bull again. He was probably, I was young. I was probably, I don't know if I was a teenager yet, going to Florida with my dad. And seeing Lexor, that was the first time I seen a pole bull that it didn't matter if he was pulled or horned, he was just good. And so it kind of made me a believer, like, well, he's pulled and he's good. And I'll be honest, he could have huge horns coming out and he's still just a good bull. And so it's kind of one of those things you almost had to see it to kind of believe it and buy in. And so once I saw him and we acquired him and we had some success in the show ring, it almost made us like believers, like, okay, well, we might have something here. And, that was almost 15 years ago now. And so that's kind of the start of like, well, we have to have a spot to believe in, a guy to believe in. That was the guy. And then from then, a lot of his genetics are still being influenced today. And we have calves coming in April off of him again. So even all these years later, we're still kind of believing in his genetics and his influence. And so it's one of those deals where you just try to kind of see it to believe it.
Yeah, I know. That's a kind of a cool story. I guess, like you talked about Ray and Ryan, the culmination, it wasn't one decision that led you on that direction, but rather multiple things that happened. But I kind of think I know the answer to this next question, but are y'all 100% polled now? I know y'all reach out and use some outside bulls that maybe aren't polled, but in general, or is the entirety of y'all's cow herd polled?
So actually, we were just talking about that, I guess, the last couple of weeks. I would probably say we are about 90% polled at the moment. I probably off the top of my head couldn't tell you a poll or a horn cow we have, but the majority of all of our calf crops are going to be polled. The next 5 years will probably be 100% polled. We've made a pretty concentrated effort over like the last, over the last 10 years, but really like the last 5 years, we made a really big effort to kind of go to that polled route. And several reasons why. We touched on it. We just don't want to dehorn anymore, to be honest. That's a really basic answer. But when you dehorn some calves, you know how it is. You dehorn calves, they lose weight, they get mad at you. Brahman aren't easy to forgive, so they take some forgiving and they're losing weight. And so the pulled ones, it's just nice to kind of wean them and they just kind of start growing and doing their thing. And like I said, it's just one of those deals where we kind of see the markets getting more and more pulled. And, the guys that come to our gate, they want to see pulled cattle. And that's really kind of what we try to progress and kind of move forward.
Yeah, if you think about it economically and as a convenience trait, if you make all other traits equal and you got the choice in a polled or a horned heifer, I would say 10 out of 10 times you take the polled heifer just for, like I said, from an economic and convenience standpoint. So I understand that. You talked about kind of y'all's foundation bull. What are some of the other important bloodlines? Kind of talk me through y'all's cow herd. And if I went and visited Salinas Ranch, what's kind of some of the stuff I'd see?
Well, we started a little different. Back 17, 18 years ago, there was not a whole lot of pole lines out there. That was kind of eye-opening, or it's like, well, wait a second. We actually got to start making these things. I think one of the things that nowadays, if you want some polled females and polled bull, you can go pretty much go out and find them. Back then, it was like, no, we have to make these things. We had Lexor, again, he was a show bull. In fact, Lexor showed back when V8 100 was showing.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I always liked V8 100 a lot, beautiful cow. And, she was a national champion, and Lexor was junior reserve junior national champion at the national show and open show in Fort Worth. And, those were the first, maybe I'm not saying the only ones, but, first polled animals were actually having some success out there. But to answer your question, we had to make these things. We had a basically 100% horned herd. In the Edwards herd, thank God there was some really unique genetics. There was a cow number 18. I still remember her. She's long gone now. Smooth polled cow, tremendous depth of body. We bred her, ended up with a bull, number 157. Honestly, I don't remember his name. Number was 157. That was a foundation bull for our high IMF heifers, females that we made. He could produce IMF. They were scanning just under sevens.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and multiple ones in different weaning crops. They were at different times. So it wasn't, well, you just lucked out. These are different calf crops that were doing that. So we thought, okay, so man, this is interesting. So we had a really good female out of him, and we said, well, we need to make another line here. We can't be stagnant. So used Johnny Jeffcoat's Vanguard bull, the 389 bull, and we made some embryo calves. And that's what gave us Didor's, the 661 bull. So that bull, was not related to pretty much anything on the ranch. And, we progressed kind of the old fashioned way. We bred the dang things and made them. Didor's a very key. His son Fusion 711 is a tremendous bull. Fusion 711, right now we have, I think there's 5 sons of his. That's a good problem to have, that they're all exceptional, So Ragnar was another one that we made. Big, not big physically, but just big bone, lots of meat, lots of rib. We kind of made these bulls from scratch, so to speak. And, I don't think anybody in the seed stock business or just regular commercial guys, I don't think anybody likes putting round bells out during winter, but dealing with the genetics, that is the fun part of this business, making these things.
I'll tell you, Keaton, speaking of 661, this is a cow you'll know, but full flesh mate sibling to that bull is a 627 cow, which
I do. We actually have a couple calves in the show barn right now out of that cow.
Yep, and that's kind of been a go-to cow for us that just kind of checks all the boxes: thick, deep, fertile, has a look, maternal merit, of course, which is obviously one of the coolest things we've kind of done is some of the first pulled maternal merit cows. She's kind of been a matriarch of kind of our pull program. And another cow that's also very cool and just a cool looking cow is a cow called Cassie 750. She kind of looks like oh boy, she's a showy looking type cow, just all the cool colors, all the things. Anyway, she's been a cow that's made us a ton of good calves. I always hear this, donors, a lot of ranches don't want to flush their donors. Well, this cow, she'll have a calf every year. Right now she has an outstanding calf at her side right now. She'll have more calves here in April. So she's kind of doing it on both ways, making ET babies and making natural babies.
That's pretty cool. Y'all's kind of focus on fertility and functionality has been impressive, and we'll kind of circle back to that here in just a second. But to kind of go towards a different direction first, y'all don't show. I'm assuming that at least my time in Brahman, I don't know if I've ever seen y'all show. Why haven't y'all kind of taken that direction? I do appreciate that y'all can market y'all's cattle without having to show them, but I'm just curious, why don't y'all show?
Well, Keaton, come on. We did have a calf champion one time in Mercedes.
Come on, there you go. And I saw some stuff, some Salinas sire stuff did really good in Florida the past couple of weeks.
Oh, yeah. No, a funny story. We're such non-show people. When the boys were, in FFA, they were just teenagers. We showed some heifers, and it was kind of a funny story. We took, I think, maybe like 3 or 4 to Mercedes. 2 or 3 of the heifers win their classes, and we take one show stick with us. So we had to borrow show sticks. Like, oh crap! We didn't expect to have any success here, so we had to go borrow show sticks to get the heifers in there. And I think one of them won class champion, or no, we got some class winners, and I think one calf champion at like 5 months old. And we showed a little bit more after that, but it was more for the boys, to get out there and learn about, have some confidence, get out there and show and be in front of the public. But to answer your question, everybody has their hot buttons. Ours, what we get excited about, Keaton, is when our first year heifers breed back And then they're the first ones to calve with their second calf and their second calf crop. That to me is so exciting to me. And a lot of people actually tell us, we come to your ranch because you don't show. Australians, we have more coming this year. They're like, we kind of like going to your ranch because we know you guys kind of ranch like us. I always kind of feel, kind of sheepish going, hey guys, I don't have a show string to show you. We're just going to go drive pastures right now. I think it kind of sets us apart a little bit. And again, it's not, Ryan says, we're just too damn busy to show, to be honest with you. But
Yeah, I think it's cool that you'll have cattle of the quality to show, obviously, because people have used y'all's genetics and made successful show cattle. But you just don't need that marketing. You figured out a way to market your cattle as kind of fertility and production based cattle that work in the real world, and it's kind of stamped it that way. So it's impressive to watch from the outside for sure.
Oh yeah, and having said that, you brought it up. In Florida, we saw quite a few show calves of Florida and whatnot, and they've had a lot of success over there. It's almost more gratifying seeing like that happen because you want people that buy your cattle to go and do good. You don't want to get the gate or get last place. You want to see your cattle that you're selling and promoting, and they're promoting as well, to be able to have success with it. And so it's almost more gratifying than even us kind of doing it, to be 100% honest with you. So it's just something that's very cool to see, and kind of something that we like to see more of, so than even us doing it.
yeah, and one thing that's, and trust me, we get it. The show ring has its purpose. It has the purpose of marketing your cattle, not, and knock on wood, we've been fortunate every year to sell everything we want to sell. And maybe to go off on a little tangent here, right now the horn guys may like to hear this. Probably in the last month, we have had probably 7 to 8 bull buyers call us for bulls, and we don't have any for sale. We have 3 14-month-old, and after that, we have about 25 10-month-old ones. And speaking of the show ring, we did dabble for just a second saying, you know what, let's take, a handful to Houston this year. But nah, we put them in the ST feed test instead. We figured we wanted more data on them than a ribbon. So we thought about it briefly, Keaton, just for a second, about maybe we should take something to Houston.
Brahman beef is the next big thing in the meat industry. Known for its great flavor along with heart-healthy benefits, Brahman beef is taking the country by storm. Brahman Country Beef features great-tasting, heart-healthy beef raised by BRC Ranch. We ship nationwide, with everything from premium steaks to briskets, ground beef, and even hard-to-find cuts like tri-tip, picanha, oxtails, and the elusive Brahman hump. Visit BrahmanCountryBeef.com and start your order today.
Well, that's cool. Like I said, I really appreciate the fact that y'all's cattle speak for themselves and add value because they actually have the production and the performance to back it up. This next question, and I know y'all have done some of it. I don't know to what degree, but do y'all kind of interject and breed some horned back into y'all's program? Are y'all using kind of some outcross horned cattle? And what's your experience with doing that?
Yeah, so earlier, we had said we started with a horned herd for the most part. And it's one of those things where it's not going to happen overnight. So in my opinion, the poll cattle need the horn genetics to kind of progress forward in a lot of aspects. You've heard this phrase in any type of cattle, whether it's Beefmaster, Herefords, any breed. You add the poll, you lose the meat, you lose the bone, you lose the rear end. It's a phrase everyone knows. And it's kind of one of those things you're like, well, there's a lot of good poll cattle out there that have a lot of those traits. But like us, we started with a horned herd and then kind of slowly progressed just years forward, kind of adding some polled here and then kind of just progressing some of the stuff forward. And the reason was because the horn does have the bone, the mass, the genetics, the pedigrees that, are sought after. And so you kind of have to add that in there because I think if you go single trait selection, all polled, you might kind of back yourself into a corner as far as you're losing some of the traits that the horn cattle can give. And so it's one of those things where it's a slow process. You can't dive in into anything just off a single trait, but you got to add some of the benefactors of some of the horn cattle. And so, now, like I said, we're almost a 90% polled herd, but I guarantee if you drive the pasture, you've had a lot of compliments that people say, man, you can't even tell if these cows are polled. They got a lot of size. They got the bone. They have a lot of you can't tell just off looking at them. And so that's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, like you said, economically, if you can have the pulled advantage but still kind of have that horn look, you really have something.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think polled breeders and horn breeders have the same idea of the phenotype we want our cattle to look like. And if we could make them all look like that phenotype and be polled, I think everybody would agree that would be for the best, for sure.
There's one bull I didn't mention because we're talking about genetics here. Our Evolution 409 bull, and again, I will be the first to say this, he's a big bull. He's almost too big. He won't fit in our squeeze chute. His actual weight was just under 3,300 pounds. He's got...
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's actual. That's not, estimated. And, he's got massive bone. And a very prominent breeder was there one day a few years ago. And he points to that bull and he goes, Ray, you could take that bull, you could throw him in J.D. Hudgens' best keeper bull pasture, and I wouldn't think twice that bull had polled genetics in him. He goes, he's massive. And again, we used, every bull has his purpose. We used him to get some frame size up early on some of the smaller frame cows. So he served his purpose. And I don't recommend, hey, we got to be breeding, 3,300 pound bulls. His calves would go between the upper 60s to mid 80s. He's never broken a cow down. I mean, he knows how to breed, if you know what I'm saying there.
A lot of people don't realize, not to change the subject, but that not always is your endpoint look like the breeding pieces that you take to get there. Like that bull, you said he's probably just a shade too big, but those cows needed more growth. And so in that situation, he was actually the perfect bull for what y'all were doing.
Exactly.
Well, do y'all genetic test for polled, which I know y'all obviously do, but this is kind of the part I was most excited about. I wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on this. A, do you test for polled genes, which I know you do? But B, have you seen kind of some irregularities, like maybe breeding polled to polled and still getting horned, or breeding a horned cow when you didn't think you'd get a polled calf and you end up with polled cattle? Just kind of talk us through that.
Yeah, well, to answer your question, we ear tag, when they're newborns, we use a Zoetis, I call it the blue gun, and get a snippet of their ear out and replace it with their private herd tag number. And then we send that to Zoetis. Kind of kills two birds with one stone. If you're going to punch their hole, just get the DNA while you're there. We used to do the tail hair, but this is just a lot cleaner and quicker. So DNA testing, kind of a hot button for me. When you send a samples to Zoetis, they have identified two poll variants, the Frisian and the Celtic. The problem with that is that they have two known variants, which are those two. So if you have an animal that is smooth polled, that has 3 generations of polled on top and bottom, smooth polled calf, and it's happened to us, by the way, and from what I understand, it happens to 50% of the polled cattle out there, you'll come back with an indeterminate designation. Indeterminate means they can't find the polled gene. Now, to put this in simple words, Keaton, let me give you an example. And you get frustrated because you're going, well, what does that mean? But let's just say, Keaton, God forbid, you had cancer. You went to your oncologist, you sat down at his desk, and he looks at you and says, Keaton, I hate to tell you, that big lump on your rib cage is cancer. And you're like, oh my God, what kind of cancer do I have? Well, Keaton, that's the bad news. I can't tell you which kind you have. We don't know. It is cancer, but we just don't know. That's what happens when you get these indeterminate designations. The Brahman breed last year came up with this rule change that any indeterminates were not going to be considered polled because the DNA said they weren't polled. To be honest with you, and not to talk about ABBA board decisions, but that was ludicrous. There was a lot of people in that room that didn't know exactly what they were looking at or talking about. Luckily, they took it back the next day and said, yeah, we need more information on this. And in breeding, like just say if you have, obviously a homozygous animal, you got double P's, you're going to get a homozygous calf. But let's just say you have PH, heterozygous. On the Punnett square, which I'm sure you're familiar with that, you breed 2 heterozygous animals, you may get a horned animal. I had a breeder ask me the other day, like, well, how do you do this? It's like, well, it's not how we do it. It's not really mistakes that happen. It's percentages.
Yeah, 25% of them are going to be horned no matter what in that mating.
Yeah, if you think about it, let's just say, again, using a little analogy here again, I guess, you're in Vegas and you're at a craps table and you're rolling the dice. and let's just say 6s are P's for homozygous or for polled. You roll the dice, you get 2 P's. Congratulations, it's homozygous. You roll the dice again, you get 2 1s. Oh, you got horn animals. And it happened to us. We have some brick house heifers right now, full flush mates. There's 3 homozygous ones, and the 4th one is horned. So it's not mistakes, it's DNA. It's the luck of the draw, of what would you come up with.
Yeah, I mean, that's, if you know Punnett Square, it's pretty quick to figure out what your probabilities are when you're breeding those cattle. And you just kind of know what you're getting from the beginning, I guess. But no, you were talking about the variances, and that was what I guess seemed the most interesting to me. And so would you walk us through that just real quick again?
Yeah, so right now Zoetis has identified 2 of the variants for the polled alleles. You got the Frisian and the Celtic variant. What they're doing, I hope they're doing it right now, after that last ABBA meeting, I guess it was in the summer meeting, I'm not sure which one it was. They're going after, I want to say it right, the Gorney variant. There's a lot of polled and Allure cattle out there a lot of Brahman cattle with polled and Allure genetics in them, or an Allure for period. It's one of the foundation animals. So that's the gene they haven't discovered yet. And there's some very prominent, popular polled animals that are being used in the breed right now that have that variant in them. But guess what? Zoetis doesn't have it found. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So they're polled because they carry the gene that's inherited through Nellore cattle, but Zoetis isn't testing for the Nellore gene. So if that's where they inherited, they're polled from.
I love genetics, by the way. Again, I find it fascinating. Let's just take VA 279. Great bull, right? He will produce homozygous. But if you look at his pedigree, and I'm sure you know his pedigree off the top of your head, he's basically 85% horned. But on that very bottom side, he's got that polled cow down there that, and he's got a smooth polled head, and you breed him to another, hypothetically 80% horned, 20% polled, you may get a homozygous calf, even though that pedigree combined is probably 80% horned. I find that fascinating. And 279, trust me, I'm not knocking him. I wish back in the day we bid on him. I wish we'd own him.
Yeah.
He could have bought a nice vacation home by now for us.
That's the part that always genetics puzzles people, or I guess people don't really think about. But I mean, it doesn't matter what percentage of polled made up his DNA. If he gets that little P, or the big P, he's gonna be polled, even if 95% of his ancestors are horned, as long as he's got that gene. And that's how I guess you can make change the way you need to.
And the Guarani gene, I mean, that's the one that the Nellore gene, that's the one that will, at that point, the ABBA can't sit there and say, okay, we've identified all the polled variants. Now let's test them. And yes, to qualify as polled per se, we can't take the breeder's opinion or whatever, just phenotype, we have to have the DNA. Well, at that point, then yes, enforce your rule and roll with it. But there's so many, and again, I don't want to talk specific animals out there that they're smooth polled. And unfortunately, speaking of that subject, homozygous is a hot button right now. And I always tell people, just because it's homozygous, do not just base it on that. Homozygous is a great trait, but the animal better back it up, the rest of that animal. He better have some bone, or she or he, some bone, some middle, some muscle. We've taken homozygous animals to the stockyard for disposition, phenotype, feet, you name it, we'll cull them. So there's some homozygous cattle out there that shouldn't be in the Brahman breed. They should have been hamburger a long time ago. So I don't want people to get too caught up like, oh, that's the ticket. It better be the complete animal.
Yeah. And just something else I thought about, Keaton. So there's a lot of misconceptions out there as far as polled. So we have a lot of guys that will call the ranch and they'll say, hey, I got to have a smooth polled, this or that. I got to, because it's going to throw more polled. That's not necessarily true. We'll have guys come to the ranch. We'll have 2 animals for sale. One is scurried and one is smooth polled. Let's say the scurried one is a better quality animal. They will buy the smooth poll one because they think it will throw more poll, which I kind of fought this battle for years. I'm always trying to tell them, just buy the better animal, because you take a scurried female, you breed them, you could get homozygous. It's smooth poll, you're more likely to get homozygous. I really haven't seen it where it's there's more percentage here. And so there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and I kind of go back to this. When it comes to polled scurried, anybody buying, just buy the best one. To be 100% honest, sounds like a really dumb answer, but just buy the best animal because it's DNA. You kind of can't predict what's going to happen, to be 100% honest, unless it's homozygous and homozygous. Then you're pretty good. Obviously we know it's going to be homozygous. But outside that, there's just a lot of variables, and it's kind of just you're playing roulette. You just don't know what's going to happen when you kind of start breeding these animals together.
Yeah, I've always been under the understanding that a heterozygous polled animal with the smooth poll and a heterozygous polled animal with scurs are going to breed kind of the same percentages. Quarter will be horned, quarter will be polled, and half of them will be in that kind of middle ground where they're either scurred or they're smooth polled but still heterozygous. Have y'all seen that from y'all's experience?
Oh yeah, and that's where it's like especially when you're doing like embryo work, like we'll have full flesh mated siblings, and you'll get a little bit of everything. Like I said, homozygous, scurred, smooth polled. You just have a little bit of everything, and it's one of those deals where kind of the only, I guess, 100% deal is homozygous to homozygous, which is very popular nowadays. But like I said, it's just you're rolling dice anytime you kind of put just pulled animals together, and you kind of just hope for the best. And that's kind of why there's not a ton of homozygous animals out there right now. People always ask me, they're like, well, pulled on pull, going to get homozygous, right? I'm like, not necessarily. That's why it's kind of taken a slow burn to kind of get to where there's more pulled animals, more homozygous, because it's not a given. And so that's kind of the challenge, and why it just takes years of breeding and kind of making mating decisions to kind of get to the end goal.
Yeah. Go ahead, Ray.
I was saying in our own herd here, when you start out, 20 years ago with a total horned herd, and you're working your way towards, knocking the horns off, it's a lot of trial and error in there. And as our cattle get more and more wound up, and not only our herd, but anybody who has polled cattle out there, you're going to get more genetic options, I guess, as you start tightening up those polled genetics. I think the key with polled genetics is keep the bone, keep the meat, keep some size to these boogers. And this is a little tangent here, Keaton, but we had a group of about 50 foreigners from South America come visit us. And, we were talking about IMFs, kind of that rabbit hole, kind of like poll can be a rabbit hole. And did this whole presentation about IMF. And afterwards, a couple of the guys come up to me and say, and I believe I have the country right. He goes, your IMF presentation was interesting, but we have no use for it. And I'm like, okay. He goes, an Argentinian wife, if she feeds, and I think we had posters up, if she feeds her family that steak with those white flecks on it, she's doing her family a disservice. We're into more taste and texture. And he goes, but tell me about your poll stuff. We find that very fascinating because that's a trait we all need. My point of that, little side story is you've got to be careful going down that rabbit hole with polled. You still make that complete animal. We went down the rabbit hole with IMF and said, wait a second, we got to have the complete animal here.
Yeah, that's like talking about the homozygous polled, and what Ryan was saying just a second ago is, yeah, that means that they're going to contribute a big P to their offspring 100% of the time. But that is one trait. That offspring's also going to get 50% of all the really bad traits that an animal has if you were only selecting on whether they're polled or not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Not to change the subject, but as we start getting to the 50-minute mark and thinking about wrapping up, and we still got some time, but I had a couple of questions that I still had yet to ask that I was curious about. And so I guess between both of y'all, and y'all can have different answers, what do y'all see as maybe the most important topic for the Brahman breed moving forward to kind of just improve the entirety of the breed?
I think the Brahman breed needs to remain relevant as a beef breed. I was at a beef master sale one day. This is the day before, just looking at the bulls. We know the BBU current president, and we're just shooting the breeze. There's people walking the pens. He introduced us to these beef master breeders. And he said, hey, such and such and such and such. This is Ryan and Ray Salinas. They're Brahman breeders. And after a little bit of, small talk, one of the guys looks at me and goes, do you mind if I ask you a pretty maybe brutal question? I said, well, sure. I didn't know what he was going to ask me. He goes, why do we need Brahman anymore? And boy, you talk about, okay, we're going here, huh? He goes, well, no. He goes, please, I don't even know you. He goes, but why do we need Brahman? The Brahman had its purpose back in the day when Beefmaster, Brangus, and Simbras, and any other one of the crosses was being made. He goes, but you guys as a breed, you guys seem to be very show-centric. What have you all really done in the past years? I mean, the cattle are beautiful. He goes, but what else have you all done? And he goes, and please, sir, trust me. He goes, I don't mean to be rude or mean. And I said, no, 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 no. That's a very fair question. So to answer, I guess, your question a roundabout way, I think that we as breeders, as seed stock Brahman breeders, need to kick it up a notch. Lord knows the Beefmasters are on fire. In that barn, there was probably 170 bulls. Those bulls were all red, moderate, big bone, thick. And you look at us as Brahman breeders, we're making them reds and blacks and red's fine, but I'm sorry, blacks and speckled and tints and, mauve colors and all over the board. I think, to answer your question, I think we need to get really down and dirty and get to the basics of raising good quality cattle for the average guy. We all know that the average cattleman is pretty old in age. We don't need the Brahman disposition to be an issue. The bad feet, the bad teats, udders, fertility. I think we need to really get down and dirty and make these things just quality animals. I know that's such a simple thing, but if you think about it, after all these years, why do we still have bad feet out there? Why do we have blown out udders? The F1s, everybody says, oh, an F1's going to last you a good 8 years or 9 years, then she's going to blow her teats out. So I think we need to remain relevant as a beef breed. I have nothing against the show ring. I absolutely think it's a necessity, but we need to kind of back off and say, we need to really get back to feed tests. That's why we put ours in the ST test, bull test. We're looking forward to the next bull test because our problem with bull tests is we never have the dang things available. They're always being sold, and we're going to dedicate ourselves to put them back in those bull tests. So I think that's one of the things that I'm a poll guy, so why not throw it out there? Let's take the dang horns off. I mean, why not? And maybe this is a little bit of South Spitz for polled, but the Charolais breed 25 years ago was 30% polled. Now I understand they're over 85% polled.
Uh-huh.
So why don't we get with it? Meaning nobody likes dehorning and such. So keep the quality up, but we need to start making these animals what I call a complete animal. I know you guys are into the modernization of them, which is, I think we need to go there. And I talked about our big bull weighing 3,300 pounds, and I said, he's way too big, but he served his purpose.
He moved up in the direction of the middle when those cattle maybe needed a little more, probably.
Some of our up and coming bulls, there's one that we're very high on. He'll probably weigh 1,900 pounds, maybe when he's full grown. But boy, he's got the feet, he's got the fertility behind him, the easy fleshing, et cetera, et cetera. And we do keep an assortment of phenotypes on the ranch because everybody's a little bit different. But I just think we need to really buckle down and get back to relevancy as a beef breed. I can talk about the subject all day long, and I'll get off my soapbox here.
I couldn't agree more. I think we need to focus on being relevant seed stock breeders again and making sure that the things we're selecting on have actual production value.
And can also this, my answer, this is actually a very complicated question because you could probably get 50 different answers from every breeder out there. And it kind of goes along with what my dad was saying. My biggest topic, I think, is supply and demand. It's just like any business out there or anything. Demand will make or break you. It doesn't matter if you're selling feed, cars, whatever it is. If you don't have any demand, then you're not moving any cattle. On the flip side of that, the supply. I think the supply has to improve to meet the demand. And what I'm saying is, like right now, you go to, let's say, a local county fair's commercial heifer sale. Brahman female will bring, purebred Brahman female will bring 3,000. Hereford bring 3,000. F1 female will bring 5,000. And I remember back in the day when those numbers used to be kind of flip-flopped. The Brahman female is bringing the premium, and now what's happened is this perception is kind of put the Brahman breed back. We got to make sure, just us as progressive breeders, that the supply gets better and then the demand will come. And I think that's probably the biggest topic in my estimation.
Yes, and the supply has to be consistent, and the supply has to be good, productive cattle, not just a Brahman. I think a lot of times those F1 programs initially, they thought a Brahman was a Brahman was a Brahman, and there's levels to this just like everything else.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Well, we'll move into kind of our last couple of questions, and I want both of y'all to answer each one of these if you can, or if you can think of something. But first one I ask each one of y'all is, what's your biggest pet peeve in the Brahman business right now as it sits? I'm sure these are things we've already danced around some a little bit, but
This one's a tough question, and it's pretty relevant right now. Probably my biggest pet peeve, and this is non-cat related, is probably just the amount of negativity, just say on Facebook or just kind of out there. And it's one of those deals where it's more like the old phrase: if you have nothing good to say, just don't say it at all. I am 100% for everyone having an opinion and kind of pushing their agenda and whatnot. And it's one of those deals where I kind of just wish everybody was more positive slash, I guess, maybe looking to work together more, because it sucks going on Facebook and you go on a deal and they're holding court on Facebook as far as they're trying to, you've seen Facebook. And it's one of those things where other breeders, other ranchers, whoever is seeing that and they're saying, man, them Brahman guys they're a handful. And it's one of those deals where I'd like to see the Brahman name slash us as a breed kind of get to where it's like, well, those guys are the cream of the crop, basically. Those are the guys that we want to be and whatnot. And so I kind of wish there was a little bit more of I guess we'll call it like a truce, and just one of those deals where everyone's more positive going forward and not so much of the bad is out there, more of the good stuff. Because there's a lot of good things about this breed, a lot of good things about the cattle, and of course there's a ton of good people in this breed. And I just wish there was more of that kind of in the World Wide Web. And hopefully that's just a change. Obviously Houston's always gets everyone excited again. So hoping going forward is kind of a more of a positive feel.
I agree. Positivity is key, especially, the things that those people don't realize is what they're saying. It can be a positive or a negative marketing of their breed. We talk about supply being important, but also, the demand's not going to be high if all the breeders are telling everybody not to do it and the cattle aren't this and that. I'm in the same boat as you.
Exactly. Yes, sir.
Ray, what do you got there?
Well, very similar. A couple of things, and I agree with 100% what Ryan was saying. I was approached in the last 10 days or so by people that are not in the Brahman breed whatsoever. In fact, one of these folks doesn't even have cattle. And he comes up to me, he goes, man, what is up with your breed? Not with your association or your membership, but your breed, which makes our cattle sound like there's something wrong with our cattle. And this was a person that does not even own cows. I guess they're on social media, and it's got to stop. Like Ryan says, people holding court because their one calf can't get registered, and they 50 comments about, how horrible it is. Is that really necessary? What did we do before the World Wide Web was around? Just fix it, and we agree, on that one. And I think the other one is people that try to preach, that my stuff is the best and you got to be doing this or that. I always say to each his own. Not every operation is the same size. Some are one-man operations and with 10 cows, and some have 20 employees and got to do things a little different. Don't be judging anybody. Just keep in your own lane and don't try to shove your ideology down somebody else's ranch's throat. To each his own. I think there's been more and more of that, and I think it's kind of social media nowadays. Let's just all make some really good cattle, and where the chips fall where they may for everybody's individual market that they're catering to.
I agree. I've seen a lot of things on Facebook here lately where people were almost directly attacking other ranchers' programs and stuff. And we don't all have to like the same cattle. We don't all have to use each other's cattle. But if you just kind of stay in your lane and make the type of cattle you like, I think most of it will take care of itself. But we could talk about that for hours. We move on to our last question, and this one's always a tough one for guests. But who is your favorite Brahman animal of all time? And y'all could have two separate animals. You could own them both. Could be a bull, cow, someone, just an animal you've heard of, even whatever y'all think. But I'd be curious to hear what y'all's favorite Brahman of all time is.
Well, Ryan knows mine. Mine has always been JDH Woodson 206. I have probably watched that dang Woodson video on YouTube probably 20 times. I'm not sure. I'm sure you probably have seen that video.
I've watched it a bunch myself.
I was watching it the other day going, man, what a man. When he's jogging, I guess, top of his back line's not even moving. He's structurally so sound. Doug Pierce, he'll come by our store sometimes and he was like, pull up that damn 206 video. He goes, I show it to all of his students, over at Blinn College, the ag students, he goes, look at that sucker jog like that. So I've always loved that bull back when he was showing, and he was just always my favorite. To be a little homer here, our Fusion 711 bull, he's no Woodson, but his production in his calves, like I said, right now I think we have 5 of his sons that we're holding back as possible bulls. I just love a bull that can just produce other bulls. A breeder asked me one time, who's your go-to guy? And I said, it's Fusion right now. I said, but I had to have a little asterisk. I said, he's going to be outdone by one of his sons already. I said, and I just appreciate that. Again, I'm being a homer here. I just appreciate a bull that can make bulls.
I appreciate that too. And a sign of good sires that he can generate one better than himself. So I would say that's a pretty strong statement there for Fusion. Ryan, what do you got?
We talked about this earlier. I'm not sure I necessarily have a favorite one of all time. There's a bunch of good ones. Probably just one that, everybody in the pool deal has dealt with is probably 279. I just think he's one of those bulls that it's hard to find a consistent bull in the Brahman breed. Just one that kind of makes the good ones that got the docility, the thickness, the look. Can make the good ones in the show ring, can make the good ones in the pasture. And 279 just has been a bull that, when I was young, like I said, I saw him when he was about a year old and kind of lasting memory. And like we said earlier, we should have bought him back in the day. That's always been the biggest what if, maybe. But he's just a bull that's been really consistent in any pull program out there. I guarantee somebody has a 279 something. And so like I said, he kind of is the one that, as I said earlier with Lexor, kind of made people believers in the pull direction that, okay, well, you don't have to go to ground zero to have a good animal. You can kind of take this 279 who's got the pedigree that everybody knows and got the look, and he can make you a homozygous one. He can make you some good ones, make you ones for the show ring, make you some good cows. And so, like I said, in my opinion, I think he's probably my favorite one. And there's a lot of good ones, but he's probably the one, in my opinion, that's probably my favorite.
I like that. Actually, 279, we went ahead and flushed Margaret's mother to 279 a while back, and we've got embryo calves that'd be half siblings to the me again Margaret heifer, but sired by 279, and they're almost all pulled, and they're really good. So that bull still works to this day. And so I appreciate that. I guess here's a chance for shameless plug. If you guys want, tell us how we can get a hold of y'all, how we can find more information, how we could purchase some Brahman cattle from the Salinas Brahmins.
Sure. Well, we're easy to find. We're on Facebook, but our website domain's pretty easy also. It's graybrahman.com. We've had that, I don't even know how many years now, 15, 20 years. Graybrahman.com. We recently updated it, and we're still updating it, but there's a lot of pictures of our current bulls that we use, a lot of our females. It tells a little bit about our program. But honestly, my shameless plug, and maybe I'm wasting my time plugging everybody else, but I think if the Brahman breed, hopefully one day we'll get to the, let's call it 50% pulled, there's a lot of growth available out there. And we were talking earlier about genetic lines. There needs to be more genetic lines out there. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for young breeders or existing breeders to say, let's make some more pulled stuff, because everybody's always looking for the next great pulled bull. Well, let's make them. And by us, meaning the breed. Let's get out there and start dabbling with some pulled stuff. And I would love to see, the breed progress further into the pulled side, because we've seen tremendous benefits out of it. And like I told you earlier, from a bull point of view, I hate to tell people no, but, we've had a lot of calls about, I want some pulled bulls. And one guy called me from Franklin, Texas. He wanted plural. How many bulls do you have available? I want to buy some. I'm sorry, sir, I have none. Dang it, I want to take these horns off. I'm tired of, dealing with the horn stuff. But anyway, I think there's a wonderful opportunity out there. That's my shameless plug, is for other breeders to get involved in the pulled movement and keep propelling our Brahman breed forward.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate both y'all's answers. I guess here at this time, would y'all got anything, I guess, that we haven't mentioned, or something that you kind of had planned to talk about that we haven't gotten to?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, we always talk about, who's a mover and shaker in the Brahman breed, and this is a kind of a plug for y'all. I think y'all are just doing an outstanding job with everything y'all are doing, and have kind of the vision and foresight to really kind of propel the breed forward. and very quickly too. I'm not exactly sure how many years y'all been doing it, but it's been really kind of enlightening to see the steps y'all taken and keep taking. Y'all are a role model breeder, of course, and so it's one of those things where we try to emulate some things here and there. And like I say, I think y'all are just on a major role, and it's been very impressive. So I just wanted to take that time to tell y'all that y'all are doing an excellent job.
Well, I appreciate that, Ryan, and I appreciate you guys' friendship and have enjoyed doing business with y'all here over the past few years, and hope to continue to kind of get to share and fellowship about Brahman and continue our friendship. So I appreciate it. If y'all don't have anything there, I guess we can go ahead and wrap up, but I appreciate y'all's time.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Take care, Keaton.
All right, y'all be good. Thank y'all.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Over the Hump podcast. Our passion is Brahman cattle, and it runs deep. And this show is about its rich history, industry trends, and stories that define the American Brahman. We hope you've enjoyed the show. If you did, make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, find us on Instagram and Facebook at BR Cotrere. See you next time on the Over the Hump podcast.